What if one of the easiest ways to get better at pen and watercolor is simply to draw smaller? Smaller ink drawings use less paper, less watercolor, less ink, and they take less time. But there's an even bigger advantage I want to share with you. You can make more of them and learn faster when you draw smaller. And every new drawing gives you another opportunity to experiment, to make mistakes, to learn, and learn something new every time you try. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Aaron, and on this channel we're learning how to become more confident with pen, ink, and watercolor. In the last video we talked about the importance of shifting your mindset from always trying to be perfect and how that ruins a lot of beginners from taking off and learning. Today we're going to be removing another barrier: size. Because if every time you practice watercolor, you pull out a giant sheet of expensive watercolor paper and think, okay, this one definitely needs to be good, then you're immediately creating pressure. And instead, grab something small. We're not trying to make masterpieces today, we're getting in our repetitions. So let's say you have an hour to practice. You could spend the entire hour working on one large portrait. There's nothing wrong with that. But instead, think about it this way. Instead, let's make 4 little studies. Now you're practicing 4 ink drawings. You're judging proportions 4 times. You're mixing your watercolors and practicing color theory 4 times. You're establishing light and shadow from different directions 4 times. You're even experimenting with your pens and how they feel and how to hatch 4 different times. That's a lot of practice packed into one session. And guess what? You can go even smaller. You can even try 2-inch portraits, kind of like what I'm showing you here. At this point, I wanted to start experimenting and trying watercolors, so I used 2-inch portraits. You're not trying to draw every eyelash. You're trying to capture the character of the face with a few marks and some watercolor, just like I did in that sketchbook. And one thing you need to realize is that there's also something very psychological happening when you start doing smaller sketches and smaller studies. When I pull out a big, beautiful sheet of expensive watercolor paper, part of me, and many times you guys might feel the same, part of you will naturally want to make something good on it. And any inclination to practice or to experiment goes out the window. But look at this little piece, this little paper. I'm willing to experiment. And that's exactly what beginners need. Small drawings require fewer materials. Just like I said, less watercolor, less paper, less ink, less time. So when something doesn't work, and it will, who cares? Make another one. Next page. That's freedom. That's the point I'm trying to make. You need to get in repetitions anyways to learn your material. That's how you get experience. So let's look at this first portrait. I'm working in this Lightwish travel watercolor binder. Lightwish actually sent this over to me to try out. And I'm 100% giving you my honest opinion. They didn't provide anything else to me. It's not a paid promotion. And I did like it. It's 100% cotton watercolor paper, very nice ceramic palette built into the setup, which I think is very convenient. And I have to admit, it was fun using. The paper handles my watercolor very well, and I particularly like having the ceramic mixing surface right there. It's connected, so you don't have to really think about how to create your perfect ecosystem. Now, would I personally throw this into my everyday little sketching bag? Probably not. It's a little thicker than I would normally carry. I like a very thin sketchbook, a very tiny watercolor palette, and a pen and synthetic mop brush. Whereas this brush was a little bit too soft for me. However, these types of brushes are great when you're trying to blend your watercolors. So that's one thing to note. But if you carry a backpack or a larger bag, then I would definitely recommend this one. And apparently, I'm not the only one that thinks this is a pretty cool watercolor palette, because as soon as I finish testing this thing out, my wife and both my daughters are going to start calling dibs on it. They're going to have to work that one out for themselves. All right, let's get back to the portraits. Doing this simple little portrait actually reminded me that I could use less hatching for female faces, which you're going to see in my next portrait, which is in an even smaller sketchbook. So for the first portrait, watch how little I'm actually trying to accomplish. The face was already established with ink. Now watercolor gets a chance to participate. I look at my reference and identify the lightest values. Those areas either remain white or receive very little light watercolor wash, and then I just let it dry. I look at the reference again. Where are my middle values? I'm always asking myself that. And so I add another wash. I let it dry. And then I'll decide whether I need to add darker values. I start light, I let it dry. Observe. Add another darker layer. Let it dry. Observe. As many times as I need. That's my process, and that's a process I hope you all will adopt. And because these portraits are so small and I'm working so small, I can work through that entire cycle pretty quickly. For this second portrait, I'm going even smaller with this little generic spiral bound watercolor sketchbook. It's a tiny 3.5 by 5.5 inch watercolor book, which are fantastic for this kind of practice. I love that it's 300 GSM, which means that it's 300 grams per square meter. It's basically a thick piece of paper. And I love the spiral that makes the paper very easy to flip. And this is where I think small sketchbooks become incredibly useful. This isn't precious. I can draw a face, add watercolor, turn the page, and try again. With this portrait, I wanted to experiment more, and I felt like I was able to. I used more layers, darker tones. I added cool, fun accents here and there. And because of the size, it's easy and fun to do. And that's what I'm trying to convey to you guys. The smaller you go, the more you're willing to experiment, the more you're willing to try new things and get your repetitions in. So I let the watercolor do most of the work with this portrait, and I wanted to allow the woman's face to be softer. I did, however, go back with ink to create a bit of contrast, and hopefully you can see how it helped it pop out a little bit more. For these ink drawings and for most of my ink work, my favorite waterproof pens are the Faber-Castell Pitt Artist Pens. I've used these extensively and the ink is fantastic. A very close second for me is the Copic multiliners, and whichever waterproof pen you choose, experiment with different sizes. The fine lines, medium lines, bold lines. You don't necessarily need more hatching. You just need to make sure your contours lines count. And if you're interested in any of the supplies I'm using, I've put them together in my art store, which is linked in the description from the homepage of my YouTube channel. Those are the links. So if you purchase them, I do receive a small commission, but again, it's very small and doesn't add any extra cost to you. So for this week only, Lightwish, who sent me that travel binder, provided a limited time discount. I'll put in the exact code so that you can check when it's still available and active. All right, so the biggest takeaway I want you to take from this video is I don't want you to become so concerned about materials that you forget the purpose of all this, which is to practice. Your sketchbook is a playground. These little drawings are not supposed to be fine art. They're experiments. Use too much water, use too little water, try another pen, make the mistakes, make terrible portraits, make great portraits. The smaller you work, the easier it becomes to say, I'll just make another one. And that's an incredibly powerful mindset for an artist. God created us with the ability to learn, to explore, and create. And I believe there's value in faithfully developing those abilities without demanding perfection every time. Work small, practice often, keep creating, and keep developing the gifts God has given you. God bless, and I'll see you on the next one.